Hello, this is Sharon Goodman from the E302 module team. We've put together some tips for you for the EMA as you start to plan and write it. This is based on what we've seen from EMAs from previous students to see what we could pass on to you as ideas, general guidance, and maybe some ways of tackling it. So I hope you find this useful. The first point may sound rather obvious, but you'd be amazed how many times students answer their own question rather than the one set. Sometimes it's not even clear they're answering a question at all, as the EMA seems to be everything I know about X, with no question or reference to E302 at the top of the first page. So although there's some leeway in how you answer it, because we want you to be able to follow your own interests and ideas, you must still answer the actual question set, not the one you wish you'd been set. Remember that relevance to the question is one of the main marking criteria. And the marking criteria for the EMA are exactly the same as those for all the TMAs, so you're familiar with them already. One of the first things you need to decide is your choice of text or practice, because this will affect how you plan your EMA and help you identify the main points to drive it and structure it. I produced a screencast on this a little while back. It's available at the link on the screen now, and we'll also post the link on the EMA forum. Your tutor also has it. You can ask your tutor in broad terms for advice, but they can't approve or disapprove of your choice. This is because you're working at level 3 and there's an expectation that you'll make your own choice independently. You need to be clear about why you've selected the text or practice that you have, and we find that students who choose it because they've always loved it or they did it on another module tend not to do so well. The reason is that if you're over familiar with it, or you have an emotional connection with your text or practice, you're much less likely to be able to stand back from it and analyse it effectively. Also, don't waste valuable time giving a detailed outline of it, with its history and its development or its context. You're supposed to be analysing it and making your case. So, in general terms, your passion for a particular text or your long history with a particular practice won't really help you if you talk at length about this at the expense of answering the question. Throughout E302, you've been referred to the 3 lenses, and these have been important ways of classifying and analysing language in different ways and with different outcomes. You'll be aware by now that the boundaries between them aren't very fixed and can often overlap. This is all part of the messiness and fun of studying language and social practices, so don't get too tied up about that. The lenses can be a handy organising principle for your EMA, but they're not mandatory. And if you do use them, you can use them explicitly, or you can use them as an implicit organising principle or a framework if you like, or a mixture of both. If you outline the 3 lenses and then don't do anything with them, you'd be better off approaching the EMA differently, really. We get a lot of EMAs where the first 2 pages comprise nothing but a description of the lenses, and then something else entirely for the rest of it. So make sure everything you use is relevant and helps you answer the question. It's a good idea to briefly outline what you're going to do and how and why. You shouldn't spend a large chunk of the word count on this, but it does help your marker understand what you're aiming to do and how you plan to get there. It's also useful for you as you write. It will keep you on track. It demonstrates that you understand the question and you know the key relevant points, and it can signal your stance towards it early on, which is really helpful. So there's no fixed recipe for doing it, but some kind of early outline is a really good idea. You should also try to link the key terms from the question to your initial outline. Otherwise, the risk is that you'll produce a lot of random or loosely connected points with no clear direction and no focus. Beware of spending too long on it, however. If your outline is 2 or more pages long, you're losing space for the actual analysis and argument. Most students find it useful to make a map, maybe on paper, of the broad outline of the EMA and maybe put sections and main points in it. Do remember that you need to write 3,000 words, so don't get too distracted or go down too many irrelevant rabbit holes, fun though they are. You may need to be ruthless and delete anything that isn't centrally relevant to your argument. Many students find it helpful at this stage to make a rough plan showing how many words per section. This helps you balance the EMA overall and stick to the word count, because it's much harder later to cut your preciously crafted points. In terms of structure, there's no one way to structure your EMA, but it does help if your points follow in a logical order, whatever that order may be, and that it makes sense to read. Everything you use needs to be relevant and put to service in your argument. It's best, therefore, to think about how you're going to structure your EMA before you start. So get thinking about this at the planning stage and it'll be much easier. It's a good idea to signal your overall analytical framework at the start and then indicate which tools you're going to use. That gets you off to a really good start as it shows you've got a sound knowledge of the material and you know where you're going. And please don't name drop authors or concepts and then go on to not use them. You need to think really carefully about what you want to use and why, and then do it. Without signalling your direction in your EMA into something clunky and repetitive, it's a really good idea to signal to your reader at key points where you're going next and what the point of that is. Because it's very easy for markers to get lost if the general direction of your argument isn't clear or if you're making it hard to follow. If your EMA is like a series of seemingly random points with no overall direction, that makes it very difficult for us to mark because we're not inside your head and we don't know what you know or what you want to do. On the other hand, please don't end every paragraph by summarising what you've just done and starting the next one summarising what you'll do next. Just make it flow nicely and aim for maximum clarity. If you look again at your plan and perhaps number your points, it'll be easier to figure out yourself what you want to say and what order you want to do it in, so that you end up with a sequence that's logical and makes sense. Think also about how you're going to move from one thing to the next, how you're going to connect your points to make your EMA flow. So at all times it should be clear how your approach advances your argument and how the evidence you draw on is going to support it. Studying at level 3, as you know by now, means that we're looking for a few things that your previous modules at level 1 or 2 weren't, or that are more important now. The best EMAs make it obvious that technical linguistic terms and concepts are understood without spending ages on definitions or copying out long definitions from the module books. A quick nod to the concept is enough to show your marker that you understand what you're talking about, and then you can move on. Definitions from Wikipedia don't really show us that you know what you're talking about, so try to avoid those. They're unlikely to be accurate or precise enough anyway. And if you're not sure about terms, go back to the module books and check. Make sure that everything you use can be helped to advance your arguments. There's no point writing everything you know about X if your EMA is about Y. And most aspects of E302 are open to being critiqued or argued against. That's fine. Make sure that you know what any possible counter-arguments are and show us that you know about them. E302 really isn't about finding the right answer. It's about showing that you understand. And sometimes that means you end up saying it depends, and that's absolutely fine. Evidence is very important in working at this level, so don't make assertions and expect your marker to just accept them as facts. You need to show us. You can quote from the module authors, you can use textual or other evidence, or in some other way demonstrate to your marker why you think what you think and what you're basing that on. One way to do this is to imagine someone standing over your shoulder and asking, "Who says?" or "How do you know that?" And you won't go far wrong if you do that. The strong EMAs that we see tend to make connections across the module materials, and they demonstrate an awareness of the relationships between different approaches from different linguists that you've encountered. So if you can bring in relevant external material that will add to our sense that you really understand, that's fine. Just make sure that you integrate any such material carefully and don't go off at a tangent. But the main point is to connect concepts and themes across the blocks. There are plenty of ways to do this, and you'll need to be selective. But if you can show that you can make links between ideas, approaches, and ways of looking at language, that'll really show your marker that you understand. EMAs which are really little more than a summary of the first chapter of every module book are unlikely to do well because they don't show us that you understand the main themes and concepts in E302. We need to see that you've thought hard about your arguments. Mere description of a text or of an analytical approach isn't really enough, nor are the kind of common sense points that you could have written without studying E302 at all. So you need to show that you've engaged with the module materials, that you can critique and evaluate them, and you're free to point out their strengths and weaknesses, that's fine. What we're after is evidence that you've engaged, not just regurgitated the materials wholesale. So on E302, you get points for thinking for yourself. We want you to take a critical stance towards what you've encountered on E302. This can be a tricky one. We want to know that you've thought about the work of the linguists and analysts that you've encountered on E302 and that you understand that they do different things or the same thing in different ways. You don't have to agree with all or any of it. You do need to demonstrate that you understand what they do and how they differ or counteract each other, and then explain why you think what you think. So one of the criteria for studying at level 3 is independent study, also known as independence of thought. You need to do more than just parrot back what you've read. So here are some brief do's and don'ts, which I hope will help you. Don't just describe. You need to analyse and evaluate. Don't use the same material repetitively. Once is quite enough. Don't jump around at random. Make sure it flows. Don't go off at irrelevant tangents. Tangents can be wonderful, but you've only got 3,000 words, so everything you use has to work for you. Don't overuse quotation. It's useful to support what you're saying, but we want to know what you think. We're not checking that you can copy and paste. So use quotation, but use it judiciously. It needs to be doing a job for you, not just be there for the sake of it. Don't write lengthy descriptions of things that aren't central. So if you're analysing a passage from Shakespeare, don't give us 3 pages on Shakespeare's social world or detailed diagrams of things that weren't asked for, and don't make any useful point. They're lovely to do and sometimes lovely to read, but they're not relevant, so you need to make sure that you're sticking to the question at all times. And please don't base your EMA on only your personal response to something without using E302 and what you've learned from the module. So a few points in terms of what you should do. You should back up what you're saying using evidence of various sorts. You should use the module materials to support what you're saying. You should use the AV and stylistics book where appropriate. It's always good to see students who are comfortable with the messiness and ambiguity of analysis if this is where you end up in your EMA. There are many conflicting views that you've encountered and many different approaches, so that's fine. You should structure your EMA according to what you want to do and how the material seems to make sense. There's no particular rules, but make it sensible and easy to follow. And do stick to the word count. We love E302 and we hope that you've enjoyed studying it. In your assignments, we want to know what you think. Your understanding of the material and your opinion can shine through, and many students do this really well. Don't drown your own voice by overusing quotation. Use quotation carefully and where they'll do you the most good. If your EMA contains everyone's voices except your own, that's a bit of a problem. When it comes to the presentation of your EMA, there aren't very many hard and fast rules. Write clearly in a clear font. We don't need things to be pretty, we want them to be legible. Please signal your paragraph breaks, use subheadings if you wish, they're allowed. Please don't add embellishment or pictures unless they're there for analysis, they are just distracting. So think carefully about how to present any texts. You can link to a stable website or you can use a screenshot, whatever will make the most sense to your marker. We really do need to see what you're analysing, so please include it in some way, and there are some pointers for this in the assignment guide on how you might do it. If you're analysing a creative practice, this can be a bit harder to show your markers, so have a think about how you can do it. You can describe the scene, you could include a series of small quotes or screenshots or extract. Just find some way that's not too long but will enable us to understand what you're saying about it. We don't really want your notes or mind maps or essay plans, please. And please proofread. It's particularly annoying if you misspell things like authors' names that are in E302. And also remember that we're marking a lot of EMAs in a short space of time, so help us to help you. So to conclude, here are a few points about conclusions. An effective conclusion usually evaluates the creativity of the text or practice you've chosen to analyse and also evaluates the analytical methods that you've used. This shows us that you've reflected on what you've done and that you know there's more than one way of analysing creativity or proving a claim, and that these different approaches may well produce different results. It may surprise you to learn that some of the best conclusions don't conclude. They reflect on the analysis and revisit some of the contradictions that were encountered, but they don't come down hard on one side or another, and that's fine. Some lean towards a conclusion or state a personal belief based on what's been done or discovered, but they don't all come down hard on one side or another. And the weakest conclusions that we see on student EMAs are the ones which simply repeat the introduction and don't really add anything of interest. But these ones seem to indicate that the task hasn't really been engaged with or that not much has been learnt or understood, so try to avoid that. And also try not to introduce entirely new material in the conclusion because you're supposed to be concluding at this point. The conclusion tends to be the main place where we find irrelevant quotation, often long quotation. So if you're not adding something you need, just take it out. So that's all from me for now. Good luck with your EMA, and I really hope you've enjoyed studying E302.